Hello, everyone. Welcome to our day two of our celebration of the first ever International Low Carb Awareness Week 2023. And today we are graced with one of the pillars of low carb knowledge when it comes to overall worldwide global scale. We will discuss low carb on a global scale with no other than our beloved and our dear Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt. And Dr. Andreas, as you all know, is actually the founder and CEO of DietDoctor.com, the largest reservoir of scientifically based and, of course, well supported low carb nutrition when it comes to resources and knowledge on how to sustain this way of life. Dr. Andreas is a Swedish medical doctor specialized in family medicine, and now I consider as a father of low carb when it comes to the resources and, of course, source of many of our very reliable knowledge on this way of life. So let's all welcome Dr. Andreas. Hello, Doctor.
Hey, Grace, great to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence despite your heavy schedule. And thank you so much that you allow us to have you in celebration of ILCAO 2023, International Low Carb Awareness Week 2023. We know you as the founder of DietDoctor.com. It's the largest ever collaboration of doctors, and I knew that you made such impacts in many industry, even in government aspects, when it comes to improving the overall health, incorporating proper nutrition, of course. But if I may ask, what made you start Diet Doctor?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much impact we had on a government level, but that's still kind. Thank you. Well, what made me started? I mean, I've been really into nutrition and health and low carb for more than 20 years now.
Wow.
It was really first getting into it on my own and really getting obsessed about it, to be honest, and then experimenting or with, I feel, good support from scientific evidence and experience, trying it with patients as a family doctor, and just seeing the amazing results that people can get. And I remember I was relatively new as a family doctor at that time, and you could have patients with diabetes, for example, going on a strict low carb diet, and their blood sugar used to be really, really high, and despite lots of medication, it just kept getting worse. And then they started this, and it just dropped down to sometimes normal. Sometimes you had to remove medications even to. And it still stayed normal. And I went around to my older colleagues showing these charts and asking, have you ever seen anything like this? And they're like, no, never. And they'd been working for, 30, 40 years sometimes, these older colleagues of mine, and still, with conventional treatment, they had never seen anything like it. So I felt that, this is real. It's not just the scientific support here. It's clear when people implement this, they can have enormous benefits in their lives. So that's why I started this website, first as a Swedish blog and then as an English one, and growing to a company with some resources. Just because at that time there wasn't any good resource online for this, and I felt that this would be a way to not just, even though it's amazing to be able to help one person at a time, it doesn't really move the needle on the scale of this problem, right? We're talking about a few billion people probably that could benefit by eating better, and just getting some sort of leverage, some more scale. That's why I started this, and it really took off, I think, because this is something that can really benefit people, and that a lot of people are interested in.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Andreas. But it somewhat surprised me because for me, you look very young, but you said you started this 20 years ago. So that's like a long time of practicing. And
yeah, well, I'm 51. Maybe it's the low carb,
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it's really plays a lot of role when it comes to you looking young and of course feeling young, and you doing all of these stuff for everyone is just so amazing. And if I may ask, because as for me, I discovered low carb about 5 years ago, low carb and fasting both, and a lot of my resources actually came from you and the uh, collaborators and other doctors like Dr. Jason Fung, among many others who have been very generous enough to share this knowledge in public. But how about you? 20 years ago, how did you come up with low carb? What made you look into these biochemical processes that are usually not really emphasized in medical school? Although now that we know it, we knew that the pathway is there. It's very simple, it's very laid down. But if you don't have the guide to really look into it, I doubt if I will see it myself. How did you discover it, doctor?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was relatively fresh out of medical school. And as you know, we in the 90s at least, we got taught pretty much what everybody has been told. Weight is all about calories, eat less, run more. That's pretty much it. We had 1 week of nutrition training. I think in the US, people sometimes have even less. And mostly just focusing on some vitamins and, avoid saturated fat and eat less. And that's it. Off you go. And it's really sad, I think, because nutrition is at the foundation of health, right? The
Yeah.
health problems, the biggest health problem in the world, I'd argue, is poor metabolic health. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, everything related to that. It drives all our top chronic diseases. It is primarily caused by the modern food environment. And then, you have doctors like me trained for 1 week about the foundation of health, and basically nothing really very useful there. So we have no tools, no knowledge to actually deal with what's causing people's problem. Instead, we reach for a prescription, which is it's good that we have those tools. We have modern medications. It's great, but it shouldn't be the foundation of the treatment, right? Because it doesn't remove the cause of these diseases. So you end up in a situation where the cause of the disease is ignored, and you're adding medications up top of medications to deal with the side effects. The underlying problem keeps getting worse because you're not dealing with the cause of it. And well, if you want to be conspiratorial, it is very profitable to treat it this way, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the medical research in medications and treatments is funded by the pharmaceutical companies that are, profiting from these medications. So, I think that the incentives are messed up. Like, nobody's evil here, but companies, they have to provide profit to their shareholders. It's their responsibility, and they are not able, I would argue, under current incentives to change the way they act to focus on lifestyle treatment and reduce their profits. It's they can't do that. They would be fired instantly. They just can't, right? They're not evil. They're just trapped in this system. So we have a very, very weird system. But I guess your question was, how did I get into it? Well, I read a bunch of books. I think the first one was a book by Michel Montignac, so the glycemic index kind of approach, sort of slow carb approach. And then I kept reading a lot of studies, and I found a lot of writings by Gary Taubes, early writings, before Good Calories, Bad Calories, science article, the New York Times article that really influenced a lot of people, including me, and a lot of early science, early studies on low carb diets that showed that it could have good effect even in gold standard randomized controlled trials. So that's how I got into it, really.
Wow.
By just saying, hey, there is evidence, it makes a lot of sense, it seems to work. When I tried it myself, when friends tried it, and then eventually when patients tried it, obviously it just worked.
Yes.
And that's the way I started.
Wow. Thank you so much. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it started really with the dissatisfaction that you see when you treat patients, following all of the protocols, following all of the standards, giving all the necessary medications, stepping up medications. And we know we've been following everything, but we cannot see patients really healing the way we define healing as it supposedly be. Because right now, if we follow the standard treatment, there is actually not much gearing on putting patients off medications. It's just like controlling blood sugar, controlling complications, but not to really a point of making it as a goal that the patient should no longer be dependent on medications. And I agree with you, business pharmaceutical side really plays a lot of role in here, and we understand because it's really part of it, but it's just that it's not really for the best interest of the patient. And I think your primary concern with your patients and you seeing the results yourself and your friends and colleagues, you cannot just turn a blind eye anymore, knowing that there's another solution. And to be fair, actually, when it comes to our guidelines, our first line is really lifestyle change and nutrition. But as to how to do it exactly and what kind of nutrition to offer for the patients, I think that's the part that we need better support. And I think this one is where low carb really kicks in because it's just plain, basic, simple. I think other doctors that I know who are not very fond of low carb, they find it hard to believe that it is just that simple. When in fact, it is really that simple. The
Mm.
rising blood sugar of diabetics patients are not just solely from their own, but really from external sources of glucose, external sources of carbohydrates that just cannot accommodated by their own body. So thank you so much, Doc Andreas, for that one. And I know you've been very successful with Diet Doctor, with millions and billions of people already helped worldwide. But what are the challenges that you can see still when it comes to spreading low carb nutrition globally?
Well, I think that it is hard to do a strict low carb diet for a lot of people in the current food environment. And we know that half or sometimes even more than half of the entire food supply is ultra processed, usually full of rapidly digestible carbohydrates, pretty much 100% of the time. Um, so I think it's challenging for people to do low carb in the long term. Granted, a lot of people do succeed, but what I think currently is that we probably need more tools for people who are not able to do a strict low carb diet long term. I mean, low carb has many advantages against other approaches. First of all, I mean, it's among the most effective or even the most effective when tested. Secondly, it's about the most simple guidance you can ask for, like avoid carbs. It's 2 words, very, very simple to communicate. Of course, everybody doesn't know what carbs are in every food, but still, people have a decent idea, I think, in many cases, and it's extremely simple to communicate compared to other things. And then I think it also has a unique advantage in that people go on a strict low carb diet, they tend to lose these stored carbohydrates in the body in the first few days, the glycogen, which binds water, which results in people losing perhaps 1, 2, 3, 4 pounds of weight in the first few days, which I think is amazing for motivation. People step on the scale and they're like, oh, wow, this is really working. I've never seen this happen before. There is something almost magical. Well, it is to a large extent water weight, but it is an amazing thing for motivation. So I think, and that's something that no other dietary approach has really, except, fasting, perhaps. But
Yes.
that's also a low carb diet. That's a zero carb
Yes.
diet. So there's nothing like it really. That's
Hmm.
a benefit. But if you ask for challenges, I think it's hard for people to do in the long term. It's very easy to fall back into old habits, and clearly either we need to find ways to make it more mainstream, have more options, have it be more accepted, or we need other viable options for other
Yeah.
people.
And I agree. I think the idea of doing low carb, especially for beginners, for those who don't really know about low carb, it's just impossible. Like for Asians to eat without rice, that's just unimaginable. For Europeans, maybe without bread, without potato, without grains, that's also just impossible. But now, if you will actually just open up yourself, you will see that it's really, really possible, and there's a way to make it just very simple and very sustainable. We will have speakers from Europe, from Australia. I'm not sure if you're acquainted with Sir Marty Kendall, engineer Marty Kendall. So
Yeah,
he will actually help in preparing lecture on preparation of nutritious food and satiating food that is low carb, that is somewhat very sustainable. And later, after our discussion, we will have a series of low carb lectures from India, from Japan, from Europe, and also from the Philippines. And there are other speakers from the US showing that low carb can actually be done. But it just needs to have the right focus, the right mindset, and of course, how it will benefit you. Because otherwise, if people don't see any benefit from it, they will not continue it in any way. But at least we know that there are challenges. We recognize it. The moment we recognize it, and then we can find a way to help others do it. And I think you are doing a lot of work on this and has been very effective with Diet Doctor and the rest of the community. People are now seeing that it works. Sometimes a model or someone we can mirror, we can reflect on, we can see that if they can do it, I can do it as well. And so I know that you've been successful in many aspects in making low carb somewhat now more mainstream as compared to what it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Now it's becoming a common word of mouth. So, doctor, what's the largest health impact of low carb movement have you seen so far? I know you've seen many.
well, I mean, there are so many amazing stories, obviously, from people, um, and also very very clear that low carb, keto, and now recently carnivore have become major trends worldwide, not least in the US, and a lot of people, a lot of other countries too. So I do think it's made quite an impact. Um, but still, it's you look at the obesity statistics, it's still going up, and
Yes.
I think that the fundamental driver of this is that well, it's financial profit interests really. I mean, the food industry, again, just like the pharmaceutical industry, you just look at the incentives. Where are the incentives? Incentives are superpowers. The incentive for the food industry, of course, as any company really, is to make more profit for their shareholders. And unfortunately, the way to do that when it comes to food is to have cheaper foods that you can sell at a higher price for more at a larger scale, right? So more profit margins and more scale. I mean, that's really extremely basic and obvious, right? The problem is that the way to get cheaper foods is to find ways to use cheaper ingredients, so you pay less for the food, and the way to get it be able to sell it at a higher price at a larger scale is to make it irresistible for people, make it something that people almost get addicted to, and of course something that people want to eat as much as possible of, because The more people eat, the sooner they're back to buy again, right? The more they want to eat. So you have completely perverse incentive here, which is to make the food as nutritionally poor as possible, because protein and really real foods ingredients are very expensive compared to processed things like sugar, flour, vegetable oils. Those are extremely cheap per calorie, cost almost nothing. So to the extent that you can just build your foods from those cheap empty calories, sugar and flour among them, it's great, right? Or starch, but also added fats. And the next thing is, of course, you make it as addictive as possible. You just combine sugar and fat together, salt, flavors, make it irresistible, make it highly energy dense. Also, make it more profitable by making it more shelf stable, so you get less food waste. Well, you have to remove all the water, make it highly energy dense, which is also a factor that drives people to eat more. So yeah, it's not just about the carbs, I would argue. I've learned some things. I thought that at when I got started in this, clearly low carb works. Clearly there's a lot of evidence. I thought that was it. It's all about carbs, driving insulin, driving fat storage. But it's not that simple. We know now from studies in the last 5 or 10 years that there are other factors too, and low carb is not the only factor. And I think it's something that we can learn from as low carb people, the low carb movement, if you will, if you want to call it that. I think we can learn things from that, because I think there are common mistakes that people make on low carb that stops them from being as successful as they could be. Primarily, going overboard with added fats is not necessarily a good thing. You do get a lot of satiety from fat. You feel full and you can keep going for a long time, but at the cost of a ton of energy, and the sort of satiety per calorie is actually low. And I think that another insight from recent research is that low carb tends to work probably best when it's higher in protein, when it's low on processed foods. Like if you eat these keto cookies and fat bombs, sweetened and flavored, I really don't think that's going to help you. It's probably going to be almost as bad as the regular version. Not quite, perhaps, but almost. And I think we can learn a lot.
Thank you so much for emphasizing all of those points. And I couldn't agree more, because, yes, low carb for me as well is the best first step, but it shouldn't stop there. There are many more ways and means. We now understand that they're actually inflammatory fats. We now understand that it's not just that as much as calorie is not the only thing that will matter, but it's still important, especially for those who are still in the weight loss process, those who still need to shed some fats. I always tell them that, yes, ketogenic diet can make you burn fats, but if you eat a lot of keto products, then you will be burning the fats from those products and not from your own body. So it's actually just gonna delay your progress, your healing, and at the end of it all, you might just not reap all the benefits, and it's just too sad if you will give up on this better lifestyle just because you don't get the right benefits because you didn't do it right. And I'm so glad that we are here encouraging everyone, helping them actually by giving them the knowledge, the right mindset on how to do it the right way. And when it comes to spreading awareness, this is actually the main goal of our ILCAO, or International Low Carb Awareness Week. And we encourage everyone to inspire others as well. We encourage them by, if they can make their own 1 minute video answering how did low carb change my life, and use the hashtag ILCAO2023 to help others know what benefits they can get from it. I think there's one post yesterday that he posted the photos of his meal and the benefit how low carb changed his life is just at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm still not hungry. That one is already good for him. And another would say, I can, as much as real low carb food is somewhat like expensive because it's real food, but at the end of it all, it's gonna cost less, because when you eat very nutrient dense food, especially with lots of proteins, you will realize that eating once a day or just twice a day is already good enough. Don't need to snack around every 1 to 2 hours. You feel full longer, more energetic, and in the long run, the less hospital bills, consultation visits, just illness, and no loss of work. Because even if with pandemic we have the common stories of low carbers, is that they were positive in COVID test, but they've never had symptoms. They were as normal as possible. I myself am a doctor, and also my husband, who have been working in the hospital for the last 3 years of pandemic, but we've never tested positive on COVID. But on the tighter side, we've already had antibodies. So that just explains how our immunity is really improved with low carb. And overall, if economy is the reason for many, in the long run, it's still going to be economical because you have a better health. And other also can help by doing a video on how to do low carb in wherever they are, so that others who are in their locality can be inspired that it can be done. Right now in the Philippines, we have over around 1 million to 2 million people who are following the pages and the communities on low carb. But with the Philippine population of 100 million, so that's just roughly 1 to 2%. And I think that somewhat can be extended on a global scale. So, as much as low carb now is spreading wide, but it's still not wide enough. So, that's why we are being loud and clear. And we always just focus on low carb first, but we always understand that it's not the end of it all. There's benefit of fasting, there's benefit of avoidance of processed foods, and we are grateful still for the partners or those entrepreneurs providing low carb essentials, as what we call it, like electrolytes or anything that can help those who are having a hard time making a clean path low carb sustainable by having some low carb treats once in a while. But we always emphasize that low carb, if you want to do it straight, you don't need to buy anything other than the ones you buy actually in the wet market, the ones you buy from the farm. Those can already be sustainable. But as again, as we said, it's not gonna be that popular unless there's this business side on other things. But to remind everyone, International Low Carb Awareness Week is a non-profit initiative. This is just a charity movement to help the community, and we are very, very grateful that Dr. Andreas graced us with his presence. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. So thank you. And speaking of low carb, I would like to ask, it's one of the questions that although we answered many times before, but I think it would be best if they would hear it from you. If you've noticed, there are LMHR, right? And there are those people who are just having higher levels of LDL and total cholesterol, but with normal HbA1c, normal or low insulin level, no signs of inflammation, better blood pressure, better overall health. But then their cardiologist saw that their LDL and total cholesterol is high and already advising them to stop low carb, stop your ketogenic diet or whatever. You have to take statins. What can you say for all of these subset of low carbers? Do we really need to worry about LDL and total cholesterol despite all the other parameters all normal?
That is a controversial topic, maybe the most controversial one in the field. And the answer is we don't know for sure yet.
Okay.
I believe that the best evidence we have suggests that really it's about the total risk, right? So that LDL is just one part of it. And you have all these other factors like blood sugar, blood pressure, other cholesterol markers, waist circumference, etc. If all of that clearly improves on low carb while LDL goes up, then I think that the best evidence suggests that it's still a lowered risk, but we need better studies. I know there are some ongoing ones, and we'll know actually some interesting things. I think already in a week or two, I think some preliminary results are to be published when it comes to this LMHR, lean mass hyperresponder thing, where they follow people with that exact issue, how high LDL, everything else being good, and see, is there any progression of coronary artery disease?
Yes.
But until then, I would argue that it's probably still a decrease in risk if everything else is looking better. However, if you really want to be sort of covering all bases and make sure that all risk factors are good, then maybe there is a benefit to trying to see, can we get LDL also to come down into more normal range in those people. I think it's possible, of course, to do an approach that is not strict low carb, but that adds a little bit of slow carbs, and that is less heavy on saturated fat and has more unsaturated fats. I mean, that's possible. It's also possible that people, especially if they already have pre-existing heart disease, there are plenty of medications, statins and other newer medications that can very effectively lower LDL. And I think for people who have pre-existing heart disease, I would want to cover that base too.
We are looking forward to those studies who can hopefully set things right when it comes to what really is the point where we should worry, or should we just continue it, and what are the things that we can do as well. And I agree with you, as much as I don't really worry about LDL and total cholesterol, provided that everything else is looking good. I cannot also say that we should just debunk all of the other researches for the longest time, showing that there are also other LDL that can actually be a sign of inflammation as well, especially for those long-term insulin resistant subset of population. And especially like in the Philippines, our laboratories here are not regularly capable of identifying which subtype of LDL it is, if it's a large buoyant one or is a small dense one, all of those. And sometimes we just recommend that if you want to look closely, aside from considering the HDL triglycerides ratio, aside from computing for remnant cholesterol, which is now seen to be a better marker than just LDL, we also recommend for those who can afford to get a CAC scan if they have. And good thing for those who actually have high cholesterol, high LDL, total cholesterol high, but normal everything else, and have been on clean kind of low carb, their CAC score is 0. And we are so happy that it's just a reassurance. But I think we still need to have more data, more scientific evidence, human studies to really support these claims, because right now it's still mostly anecdotal and as evidence we can see, like in our practice. But it would be best if we can gather all this and put it in a research paper, a formal journal, published journal, for this to be seen by others as well. So thank you so much for that, Dr. Andreas. And another subset, of course, of our community, most of our followers actually are middle age to senior age. So from 40s, 50s, now we have 60s, 70s, 80s who are following low carb diet, and they've never felt better. But one of their concern is that they look older because they've had muscle wasting. As much as we always emphasize that as the moment you do low carb, you will need to increase your fat and protein intake, others are still afraid of increasing their red meat, increasing their fatty meat intake or fats in general, because they've been brainwashed for the longest time that it's bad. And as a result, they've had muscle wasting. They've had lower protein component in their body composition. And that's now their concern. They stop low carb because it's making them look too thin. It's like they look sick, although they feel great. They feel energetic. So, do you have any tips, doctor, when it comes to low carb for a healthy weight gain?
Yeah, sure. I think you're on the topic already. Like it's key, I think, to increase protein intake, and of course, if you want to put on more lean mass, if you can increase protein intake and do some sort of weight training, it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot, but a little bit, lift some weights. Could do it at home. It's relatively easy. Very cheap tools or no tools, push-ups, etc. requires no tools. Squats require no tools. So it's possible to do this with little or no equipment, and little or very little time. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day can be a lot better than nothing. And then eating more protein. And of course, if people are concerned about eating red meat for any reason, could be ethical reasons or financial reasons or any reason really, then there are plenty of plant-based options, I would argue, that are sometimes perhaps a little bit higher in carbohydrates, but it's slower carbohydrates, it's high in fiber, low energy density, very unprocessed. For example, beans and lentils. I know it's not necessarily keto level low carb, but I would argue that these are not our enemy, and that we perhaps even in the low carb community we shouldn't be so concerned about small amounts of modest amounts of carbohydrates in the forms of beans and lentils, because it's high protein, it's high fiber, it is low energy density, it is certainly not hedonic, addictive in nature. Another thing that can be low carb as well is tofu or other soy-based products. I know it's also sort of controversial online, but to my awareness, the best evidence really suggests that it's fine, very nutritious, and these concerns about soy products seems to be not really well supported in the literature. So I wouldn't be much worried about that. And it's also possible to take protein supplementations in the form of protein shakes or something like that. Could be relatively budget friendly. Of course, a very, very effective way to get your protein intake up without any special effort. So for people who need it and to increase their lean mass and get stronger, if they find it hard to do it with real foods, then I do think that's a fair option to use.
Thank you so much for those input, Doctor. So, if I may to summarize it, we really have to prioritize proteins, especially if you want a healthy weight gain. And by healthy weight gain, we want to increase lean body mass and not just water retention, not just another form of fat buildup, but more on lean body mass. And proteins, when taken in, will be much more absorbed and be converted into lean body mass if there is physical activity, especially weightlifting, because others are just eating a lot of proteins but not doing anything, just sitting there, lying there, and I don't think it's gonna be good in the long run. What do you think, Doc
Oh,
Andrea?
no, I do think it still has an effect, actually. I mean,
Oh,
and I think especially people who are vegans, I think
oh,
could or hardcore vegetarians could benefit a lot from increasing protein intake, because I mean, if you go vegan and you don't care or sort of focus on protein, there is a risk that it's going to be very, very low, depending on what kind of vegan foods you you choose to eat. And then you can actually lose quite a lot of lean mass, even beyond what you lose by not exercising. So that just increasing protein in that case could help you put on substantial amounts of lean body mass, even without exercising. And of course,
yeah.
if you do weight training on top of that, it's going to be even more. So, yeah, I think that even just the protein on its own can have a pretty solid effect here.
Yes.
Weight training on top of that, even better.
Yes, and since you've mentioned vegan and vegetarian, I think we should really emphasize on that because most of them are not reaching their minimum protein requirement in a day because others are always thinking of proteins just in the amount of protein per gram of a certain food item, but what others fail to realize is that there are certain proteins that are actually not that digestible for us humans. Like for plant-based proteins, not all of these amino acids and proteins can be broken down by our body and can be absorbed as 100% or as maximum as compared to when we are eating like meat, for example, animal-based proteins. So it's not that we will discourage them because if it's their choice really to go into vegetarian or vegan, but they just need to work extra when it comes to reaching their protein requirement. And I agree with you. Supplementations from certain protein products can be best because there was a time before that we really tried to keep up with our protein intake. It's just very filling. It's just so much. It's really hard to get your 2 grams per kilogram of body weight of proteins in a day, especially if you are busy. It's like you're gonna be spending a lot of time all eating. So thank you so much, Doctor, and also in enlightening us that again beans, lentils, all of these, although they have higher carbohydrate intake as compared to other low carb vegetables, for example, who barely have the digestible glucose component or carbohydrate component, these ones can still be added and a better option when it comes to bulking up because it has good protein component, fiber, and I like that you mentioned the carbohydrates that they have is not addicting at all. So I think that plays a lot of roles as well. So thank you so much. And amongst many
Nobody
all
ever got addicted to eating beans. I
the
don't think.
beans.
No.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's why I say if you are craving for it, most likely it has some addictive component. And if you are eating it, and what's good though with these starches, like starchy vegetables, but protein rich, is that they have higher satiety score. You get
Yeah.
the more
I mean,
satisfaction.
that is an interesting approach that we are, of course, been exploring for a few years now, and this satiety per calorie approach, which is, I think, very complementary to low carb. Low carb
Mm,
diets tend to have higher satiety per calorie, but this is really trying to look from first principles, like what is it, what kind of factors do really influence how much satiety we get per calorie. In a way, it's like trying to figure out what foods cause us to eat more, what foods cause us to eat less, and then trying to eat more of the foods that cause us to eat less, right? And
yes.
low carb is a very simple approach to do that, but it's not the only way. So it's interesting to take this sort of agnostic approach, looking at uh, how can you add some carbs that are not going to cause any uh, harm necessarily or difficulty from a metabolic perspective. But also another thing is like how can you look at a low carb diet and see how can you make it even better, even more effective. Like people who are on a low carb diet but they're not quite reaching their goals, I think this lens can be extremely helpful to identify like what are the problem foods here that are
Mm,
causing people to not quite reach their goals. What and also what are the most helpful foods in their diet. So like if they know that, then they can eat even more of the foods that they love that are helping them, and maybe some other foods that they thought was fine, but it's low satiety per calorie and they don't really care so much about it, then they can eat less of that. So it can be a really helpful tool to fine tune and get further, get a little bit stronger, a little bit leaner, for people who are on low carb, doing well, but not quite as well as they would like. I think this satiety per calorie tool is potentially really, really beneficial, um, whether you're on low carb or not.
yeah, yeah, that is really a very good point. And we understand as much as we are promoting low carb in my other lectures and my other learning modules, I always emphasize that there are so many other people who are thriving when it comes to their health, but not really into low carb. But yes, they are never into processed foods. They are always into real foods. It's just that low carb is like the easiest quick fix maybe, but generally you can get the benefits, especially when we notice longevity studies, no matter what diet they have, but it's always, almost always, never on overconsumption. We even have Japanese who eat just 80% full. So those kinds. And that's why also many who are non-low carbers but are very religious when it comes to their intermittent fasting schedules. So overall, they actually eat less. So just eating less can actually do so much when it comes to overall health. Seldom you can see an overweight person, especially on the fat side, to have that longer life as compared to those who are on the lean side. And that is why identification of foods that will make you feel satisfied, you will make you feel somewhat already okay at a lesser amount can actually play a lot of role. There is this growing line when it comes to our low carb community that you don't have to eat less, you just have to eat right. And generally, that's also okay, especially for beginners who are still not so used to not eating so much. At least for the first time, they will eat a lot, but it's already insulin provoking kind. But I think in the long run, there's really benefit from eating either just enough amount, because otherwise too much of those calories, even if it's low carb, but if it's too much, then it's still no use. Would you agree, sir?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. Is it about eating less or is it about eating better? I think it's a false question, really. It's not one or the other. They are very, very connected. If you eat
Mm,
better, sort of from a satiety calorie perspective, you will automatically eat less. If you eat sort of less satiating foods, you will eat more. So what we eat is really what determines how much we want to eat. And this has been demonstrated in really, really well-controlled studies. There is
mm,
one from Kevin Hall from a few years ago, very well known, where people who got ultra processed foods, they ate 500 calories more per day without noticing, quickly gaining body fat. And people who ate an unprocessed diet, they quickly they ate less, 500 calories less, and started losing body weight without even counting, without even trying. It's just subconsciously they eat more or less.
mm,
And this was despite carbohydrates, for example, being on the same level. So it's not just about carbs, it's about other sort of satiating qualities of food. In
yeah.
that study, what seems to be the biggest, potentially, we don't know for sure, but potentially the biggest difference between those diets is the ultra processed diets was far more energy dense. And
Yes.
that's sort of what you get with those with processed foods. They remove the water weight, make it more shelf stable, make it more addictive, make it more palatable,
Mm,
make it more and also yeah. So there really are multiple factors. But anyways, going back to what you said, is it about eating less or is it about eating better? I would say these things are not separate things. They are very, very connected. And the more satiating per calorie foods you eat, the less you will eat,
mm,
subconsciously.
mm,
Low carb is one simple approach to achieve that. Very simple to understand and communicate, and it tends to just work for people. But there are some common mistakes. Often we get told that if you're not succeeding on low carb, if you're not losing weight, for example, you should look out for are you eating too many nuts? Are you eating too much dairy? And it's really fascinating because those are high fat dairy products and nuts. They are among the lowest satiety per calorie foods out of all common low carb foods. So it's a powerful lens, I believe, to see which foods are potential problems, which foods are potentially the most helpful. Use that
mm.
to tweak your diet, and whether you're on low carb or not can help you be successful.
Thank you so much for those input, Doc Andreas. And yes, I agree with you because when it comes to our community, we've really seen patients who or members who are not seeing the progress that they others are seeing, and because they're always snacking on those high energy dense low carb foods but too much in calories, and as when it comes to nuts and seeds, it became their staple. And I always tell them, yes, you can have those low carb nuts and seeds, but try to control it to just a handful. But if you are the type who can binge eat, who can finish a whole can in one sitting, then maybe it's not for you. And I think when it comes to the satiety per calorie idea or paradigm, it's when you identify which foods make you eat less. And those are the foods that you should actually be focusing on, because it will put you in that low inflammatory state in simpler means. But I think the challenge here would be for people who are looking at food for pleasure, because if it's a food that will make you eat less, I don't think they feel so much pleasure in it. So I think one of the mindset that we have to deal with is to look food as really for our nutrition, for our healing, and not just a source of pleasure. Maybe find something else to do that will give you more pleasure and not look for it for food. Because otherwise, if you will look for pleasure alone when it comes to food, and I always emphasize that satisfaction, satiety is different from the pleasure center in our brain. The pleasure center is usually triggered by those addicting foods. But of course, it's a different approach from one person to another. And but thank you so much for this insight.
I mean, that's a really interesting question, though, because I do think that there is an important distinction here between pleasure and reward. Like you can
Mm,
actually imagine eating extremely pleasurable foods. You go to a Michelin
Michelin star.
star restaurant, and they will serve you these extremely, if you're used to that and you're into that kind of food, it can be extremely pleasurable, like the most pleasurable foods that some people can imagine. That may not cause you to eat a lot.
Yeah,
Like
good point.
it's not really about pleasure. It's about reward. It's about the dopamine. It's about the addictive foods, and because honestly, eating a whole bag of potato chips is very, very easy to do. I've probably done it on multiple occasions during my life, right? Is that really so very, very pleasurable to eat an entire bag of potato chips? I mean,
Mm,
really? I don't think pleasure is the thing there. It's more addictive. It's driving this dopamine driven sort of, you just keep doing it. You become like a rat in some experiment. You just can't stop, and
mm,
you just eat until you're nauseous. That's not pleasurable, but it's an addictive almost behavior,
mm,
right? So
mm,
I think that is what we need to look out for, this reward focused, dopamine mediated sort of addictive behavior. That's the problem, the foods that drive that, and that's the ultra processed foods, that's a fat and sugar together, etc., etc. Well, I do think there is room for very, very pleasurable eating experiences together with, in social settings and whatnot. Like really, really delicious foods can be, good for us, I believe,
mm.
if we remove the sort of addictive, hyper palatable foods and really focus on quality, on taste, on the experience. I do think that, yeah,
Yeah.
pleasure can
Mm.
absolutely be had from healthy foods.
Oh, that's a very good point. I never thought of that, but that's really something that really sparked something in me, and it's a good point. Thank you for that. And yes, pleasure in different ways, as long as it's not going to put you in that addictive cycle that eventually it will ruin your health. And those ultra processed foods have that ingredient in them. So thank you so
And
much for that.
being addicted to these kind of foods, that's not a pleasurable place to be. That's
Oh,
like that's
mm,
miserable. Like nobody ever. I mean, of course, you get
yeah,
an instant sort of dopamine hit by this addictive thing, but then it just leads you to keep going, and you end up in a place that's kind of the opposite of pleasure. It's like
Right.
miserable. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And we know
interesting.
addiction is really an illness, and food addiction is one of those addiction that's really underrated right now, not even recognized, and many people don't want to admit.
Yeah, I
So
think it's super, super common. And again, this is what the profit motive of the food industry drives us towards this, right? Because they have an incentive, very, very, very powerful incentive to create food products that are as addictive as possible, because no customer is as profitable as an addicted customer.
yeah.
Someone's, if you can make, if a company can make their customers addicted to their products, then they can
Yeah.
sell any number of them at any price that they can afford. It's
Yeah.
just it's an optimized profit engine, really.
Yeah. Sometimes I have this. There's one time that I tell my patients and my community that if there's this one thing that makes you crave every day, it's that one thing that you should really avoid, because it shouldn't be that way for you to keep on craving it just for that temporary pleasure that is actually a part of an addictive cycle. And after that pleasure is a sense of feeling miserable, and that's not something that you want to be in. So thank you so much for that, doctor. And as much as low carb is really benefiting almost everyone with illness or even without illness, can you think of any metabolic illness that cannot benefit from low carb nutrition?
Well, if you define metabolic issues as or diseases as sort of metabolic syndrome, like obesity,
And
hypertension,
yes,
all these connected, fatty liver, PCOS, etc., etc., etc.
lifestyle diseases in general.
Yeah. No, I think they can all benefit from low carb. However, I don't think that low carb is the only way to approach it. There are other ways to nutritionally and not nutritionally, obviously, like exercise, improving sleep and stress, and so forth. That can be also quite powerful. Although I do believe that nutrition is the biggest factor by a substantial margin. And again, there are other approaches that are not necessarily low carb that can also work. If it's higher satiety per calorie, less processed foods, more nutritious foods, you can approach it in a non-low carb way as well. But low carb still perhaps the simplest approach to explain, and among the most effective, if not the most effective, in randomized controlled trials,
Yeah.
with some superpowers that other approaches do not have, like this initial rapid weight loss. Nothing else has that.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, I think it's a very, very strong option. Anybody with any sort of metabolic health issues could potentially benefit from a low carb approach, I think.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I just would like, it reminded me of my question a while ago on the largest health impact of low carb movement so far. I think one of the largest impact that I've seen would be the incorporation of low carb nutrition in the current diabetes guidelines on medical nutrition therapy. Out of nine possible options for diabetics on medical nutrition therapy, I think two of which are low carb, which is general low carb and a ketogenic, very low carb diet. And I think that's already a very big impact. Thank you so much, Doc Andreas. And can I just have one slight question? Because there are also so many who are worried about very rapid weight loss or drastic weight loss that is just beyond the standard 1 pound per week kind of weight loss. What can you say about that? Should we really follow the 1 pound per week weight loss?
No, I don't think that's a big issue at all. I think if people lose weight faster while still eating uh, enough to not be hungry after meals, then that's probably just a good sign that
Yeah.
it's really working well. And as people, often this happens to people who have a substantial amount of excess weight, and as they sort of start approaching a more
Slower.
ideal weight for them, or more sort of normal weight for them, then it will slow down. So if people have a lot of excess weight in the beginning and they start a low carb diet and they lose even more than a pound a week, then I think that should be treated as a good sign, as long as you're feeling good.
Yeah. And especially the one that you mentioned a while ago, the moment you start low carb the right way, the lowered insulin, the lowered glycogen, the first set of weight loss is really just water loss. And although it's just water loss, but it's also a very significant improvement because excess water that we don't need to carry is also useless in our body. So ridding all of those excess water retention is already the first step, if not the start of a very healthy progress. So thank you for that, Dr. Andreas. And if I know, even if we are already starting to be a little more on the side of healthcare professionals adapting low carb, or at least recognizing that it can be one of those options that we can offer to patients. I even have friends who are not practicing low carb, but are now offering it to their patients as a possible option if ever it will work for them. What can you say to those who are strongly against low carb?
Well, I can only say, look at the evidence, look at the experience here. There are many studies showing that this is one of the most effective, if not the most effective approach for eating for metabolic health and weight loss. So, and it's been proven by experience, I don't know, millions and millions and millions of times. So I think we should be guided by evidence. I think we should be evidence-based in what we do. And if we strive to be that, then I think it's unavoidable to see that low carb is one tool, one approach that works really well for a lot of people, maybe at least as effective as other approaches, maybe more so. And we shouldn't be afraid of using something that works.
Okay. I agree with you. Thank you so much. And even I'm into low carb, but I don't also limit myself from reading articles that are against low carb. If there are articles that are against low carb, I am even more interested to know more about it. And so I think others who are against low carb should also be open to studying them, looking at the evidence so that you'll know if it has a point or if there's anything that maybe we should update from what we've known and what we've trained to do. I am in awe of doctors like you who are in the medical field, because usually internal medicine, pediatrics, and family medicine are all provided with these guidelines that if you will deviate from it, you will become the outcast of not following these guidelines. I think I feel somewhat lucky to be on the surgical side because we don't have strict dietary protocol, and I think that path made me open up more to these non-mainstream approaches as compared to the standard American diet and the dietary guidelines that's being provided. But with you, even if you have all of these guidelines, you were able to see and discover and even pioneered the movement on really looking at other possible approaches that is just beyond what is popularly being introduced. And I will not hold you any longer, Dr. Andreas. We are already more than an hour now. Thank you so much. But lastly, do you have a message for our low carb community who are watching us right now that are doing low carb despite challenges in their food sources, in their finances, against their doctors, against their families who don't believe or are somewhat still skeptical about low carb? What can you tell them, doctor?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is an evidence-based approach that works. I do think a lot of people could benefit from doing that. I mean, we're dealing with the biggest health problem in the world, poor metabolic health. It drives all our top chronic diseases, and to the extent that people can influence friends and family to eat in a better way, I think that can positively impact their health, not just now, but also for a long time into the future. Maybe help them live longer and live more fulfilling lives. I think that's a profound thing, really. I do think we should also though be open to other approaches, avoiding ultra processed foods in other way, eating nutritious foods in other ways. We shouldn't think that low carb is the one and only approach that everybody has to be on, because it's not. But it is one tool that has been proven to work, and there are probably a billion people or 2 billion that could benefit a lot from this. So I think people who are doing it, who are helping other people do it, are doing something very good for the world and for the people they meet.
Thank you so much, Dr. Andreas. And so that ends our talk for today for the International Low Carb Awareness Week. We thank Dr. Andreas Eenfeldt and all of the Diet Doctor team for doing such a tremendous job in helping a billion or more, and hopefully the world to be more knowledgeable in making better choices when it comes to their food. And in addition to food, of course, physical activity, sunlight, sleep, and all the healthful habits that we can incorporate in our daily lives. So, Dr. Andreas, would you invite them? Where can they see you? Where can they follow you if they want to learn more about low carb or get to hear more from you?
Well, anything about low carb, we have dietdoctor.com, which is the most popular low carb website on the planet. It's been that for a decade or so. So anybody's welcome there. And if people want to look into this new satiety per calorie approach, look at how can their approach be tweaked even more if they're on low carb, or how can you succeed even on a slightly higher carb diet? Then we have a new brand called Hava. So people can go to our website, hava.co, and well, we're also on Twitter or X. So that's it.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Andreas. We will hope to see more of you in our community. And don't worry, we have a million strong followers who will be very supportive with dietdoctor.com, and at the same time will be very loud when it comes to helping themselves and helping others live a better way of life. Thank you so much, sir. Goodbye.